Today we're going to be painting our masks. I have here a set of double primaries. It's the primary colors in two different versions. With these colors I can make almost any other color. So what I ended up going for here is a mottled flesh color. That's kind of the image that I had in mind. I think this was inspired by some of the monsters and fairies that Del Toro creates, though I didn't realize it at the time. This is something that I came up with in some afterthought. So when we're trying to mix a lighter flesh color, like mine, we end up starting with a pale pink, yellow, and green. Add some red to that list and you'll have the colors that you need to create this kind of skin tone. You'll want to look at the model that you're painting to reference whether they have more of a yellow tint to their skin or a red tint. If their skin is lighter, you will be adding more white. If it's darker, you will be adding more green. You actually make all of the different skin tones with the same three basic colors: red, blue, and yellow. So you can make different color combinations out of those that help simplify the process for you. But it all depends on what value your skin tone is going to have. For a very light skin tone, you'll want to start with a pink like I did. But for a darker skin tone, you'll see that you'll want to save the white for last. It's probably a good idea to have a high quality blue as well. In this class, we usually learn how to mix every kind of skin tone for a project whenever we're casting fingers, but I don't know if we're going to have time to do that this year. Either way, by listening to these instructions and watching this video, you should be able to pick up some of these skills, if you choose to do so. You'll notice that when I'm painting every layer other than the initial layer, I am deliberately missing spots. My goal with each layer is to let the previous layer shine through so that it is still visible and every layer will be seen at the end. All right, you see this flap I've got lifted up right here? This may not be the appropriate time to do this, but I'm just going to show you anyway. I got my paintbrush loaded up with paint, and I'm just going to glob it in there, and I'm going to lay that piece back down. And so I'm actually using my glue, or my paint, as glue. So acrylic paint works as a great glue. And so that'll paste that right back down there, just like I want it. It may pop back up because I'm still working this stuff around, trying to get another layer on here. As you can see, I'm deliberately missing some of the fleshy spots that I've gotten before on purpose. Alright, as you can see, I have refreshed my water. I'm almost done with my second layer. I just had to go change out my water real quick, and I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. So here I have a round brush, and I'm going to come in and try to get around some of these teeth. So it's just like I was telling you, we have the ability as artists to have a level of control over our brushes that a lot of people don't really realize. We try to avoid painting, some of us, when we're learning, because we think we're going to lose too much control over our brush. But I'm going to try to show you here. So I'm going to slide in here. You see how I'm sliding up under that tooth? So it's all about the angle and how I apply this. So you don't really lose any control of the brush. So see how I'm actually, let me make sure I'm focusing here. See how I'm leaving some of these bits here in the second layer? Let me come in here and cut under. I'm smashing my brush out and coming here and painting under the teeth. But I don't want to cover up everything. So I actually may have even covered up too much. I wonder if I can pull some of that back off. Maybe. Yeah, a little bit. So you see how I'm leaving some spots on purpose? I'm going to do that with every layer. Every layer that I put on here, I'm going to leave some spots of the other layers. And so you see these right here, these are just spots that I haven't covered over yet. Those are not deliberate. It's just really hard to get in some of these places with acrylic paint, because even when you get your brush into those crevices, it can actually, once the paint dries, it shrinks. And so then you're kind of stuck with the same exact problem you had before, where the paint shrinks up out of the hole and actually reveals missed spots again. So acrylic paint's really difficult in that way. But by the time I get done putting so many layers on here, it's not going to matter. So I could have put many more layers of mache on here. I chose not to, because I'm going to put tons and tons of layers of paint on here. And plus I'm running out of time, because I want to show you guys this before it's too late. But you'll notice there's another issue here too. You can see through my original layer here and see some of the writing and the stuff that was done before on this recycled paper. And so I recommend that everyone, before you start, paint the entire mask white. Paint the entire mask white before you start painting, so that you can blank out the mask, so that you start all with one value. I want a bunch of different values on here, so I didn't bother with that step. And I know I'm going to put so many layers of paint on here that it's not going to matter. But you guys may not have the same amount of time, so I can devote the time that I need to this, where you guys don't necessarily have the same amount of time. I'm not saying I don't have anything to do but work on these demos. I definitely have tons to do. But I'm going to go ahead and try to do this mask right and put tons and tons of layers of paint. So if you look on my hand where I was matching the paint samples to kind of get this fleshy color for my skin tone, I didn't do too bad, right? So it was a little different before it dried, but once it dried, it came out to be the right thing. So I'm trying to make this really mottled, fleshy skin. But look at my skin. There is no spot on this with one solid color or value. If you look, I've got like tons of different colors of reds and yellows and all these different peach colors and all these different colors in here, just speckled all throughout my hand. And so you'll never be able to match your color, because we're not just one color. We're not just one color. And you notice, like I said before, it's all primary colors. So I can make any skin tone out of the same colors. So that's just a little interesting thing there. I'll just keep touching up these spots. I'll keep putting more and more layers of different colors until I get all the little blank spots covered up. And so that I have enough layers of paint to have all these different colors, just like in my own skin. I want it to be kind of, you know, blotchy and pigmented and everything else. So I'm going to put as many coats on here as I can get of different kinds of paint. I would like to point out again that you will notice I'm still deliberately missing spots. For our eyes to do that to us, our brain to read that way for us, because that helps us to navigate the world that we exist in. Now, I recommend on your first coat, get a really good covering. Try to cover all the spots and little pinholes and stuff, like on your first coat of actual paint where you're trying to paint this thing to look like you want it to, because that'll save you some trouble later on. I'm going to be putting so many layers on here, it's not going to matter a whole lot, but even I'm having to deliberately try and miss parts where I painted before and hit places where I missed, which takes more effort. It takes some of the fun out of it, maybe some of the carefree joy out of it. And so the reason I did that, the reason I didn't quite finish was because I just ran out of paint. I'm used to using oil paint. And oil paint, it goes a lot further. A little bit of oil paint goes a long way compared to acrylic paint. Acrylic paint, you know, can be really difficult to get it to move around. I use a lot of water, and technically you're not even supposed to use water. You're supposed to use acrylic medium. Water is supposedly degrades the paint after a while, but I'm not exceedingly worried about that. To me, it seems like it's just fine. It's good enough for what I'm doing. So I use water to loosen up my acrylic paint usually. But you guys are welcome to use whatever you like. But the main thing is it's hard to get good coverage out of that when you switch from one medium to the other. So a little bit of oil paint, you know, you could paint a lot with just a really small amount of oil paint, but that much acrylic paint doesn't really seem to go that far. So I actually didn't quite make up as much as I needed to, but I knew it was going to be fine. I knew by the time I got through with all my layers, it would be all right. Okay, I've got a few layers here now, and it's starting to come together, starting to kind of look like I wanted it to. I want it to be a lot darker on the inside of the mouth and than the outside of the skin. Kind of have a color difference, kind of like humans have. So we have a different color skin on the outside of our face than we do on the inside of our mouth. And so I want to kind of replicate that in here. And this is going to get darker and darker as it goes back toward the center, darker and cooler. So right here, I've just washed all the paint out of my brush, but it's still wet. And so what I'm going to do is, I've got to always keep a paper towel handy whenever I'm painting. That way I can dry out my brush. So when you get too much water in your brush, it starts to kind of mess up your ability to paint. So you want to keep your brush just right here. So I'm going to go ahead and, now that I got this cleaned, open up a little bit of matte medium. So matte medium is a clear medium. Looks like this needs to be mixed a little. Hadn't been used probably in about 30 years. So it looks white, but it's actually clear. It'll dry clear. I know it's white right now, but it will dry clear. So that's what I'm gonna say. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a good coating on here. I want my skin here to be a matte finish, because I want the inside of the mouth to be really wet and shiny looking. The outside I want to look very dry. So I'm going to put a thick coating of matte finish on here. Then I'm going to put a couple more layers of skin color. And then I'm going to come back and put some more matte finish on that. So what I'm trying to do is get this translucent look like we have in real skin. Okay, so your skin, one of the reasons it's so hard to paint skin is because skin's actually kind of see-through. So you have a bunch of layers of different skin pigments and stuff in there. And so that's what I'm going to recreate with paint. So we got pigment and paint. And so I'm going to recreate those layers and that translucent effect by making these layers of translucent paint in between some of the layers of our visible paint. And all this is just acrylic medium without the pigment. So remember we were talking about pigments and binders. So this is a pigment, this is a binder without a pigment. That's all this is. And this is matte finish. That means it's not shiny. I want to make sure I don't get it too thick. So all those where it's really caked on, I need to go and go back and smooth that out a little, because that might not dry clear enough if we put it on that thick. Okay, so we got this whole side done. We've got most of the back done. Let's get this side done. Looks like I got some paint on my tooth last class and didn't notice it. Alright, so one thing you might have noticed is I'm touching places I just painted a few minutes ago. And I'm able to do that because this is acrylic paint, and acrylic paint dries incredibly fast. So anywhere from 5 minutes to 15 minutes, depending on the condition of the paint and the humidity in the air and all kinds of other factors like that, the temperature in the room. And so you can have a lot of different factors and variables in this, but you can get it dry enough pretty well to touch to where it's kind of ready to take another, I'm not going to say to touch, but to take another load of paint in just a few minutes. So I'm able to touch that, and it might kind of stick to my hand a little if I leave it there too long, but I can hold it to paint it even though I just painted it on there a few minutes ago. So this should all be dry and ready to take another few layers in just a few minutes. And so it's a little different than oil paint that I'm used to working with, where you have to wait days for it to dry. So one of the great things about acrylic paint is that it dries fast, and one of the bad things about acrylic paint is that it dries fast. So it actually kind of hinders your blending whenever you can't blend it because it's too dry too soon. So that's one of the things I love about oil paint. Speaking of oil paint, you can actually get the same kind of effect or a more oil paint like look out of acrylic paint if you do the same technique I'm using to create skin. So I'm putting layers of glaze and layers of paint sandwiched in between each other. And what that'll do is it'll give me this translucent kind of really nice look to my skin here, but I've also heard other artists say that it'll make acrylic paint look more like oil paint. I don't usually have to worry about that because I usually just use oil paint unless I want it to look like acrylic paint, and then I use acrylic paint. Alright, something that you'll notice here is we have a really deep hole right here, so I'm going to try to fix that real quick the best way I know how. So I have two options. I have a paintbrush that I invented that has an extendable handle to where it's the normal size when I oil paint with it, a round brush, but the handle stretches out and can be bent in different directions so that I can go in sculptures and go down in places like that and paint if I need to, so I can make that look like it's deliberate. But instead, I think what I'm going to do in this instance is I want to eliminate the hole. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to cut a piece of styrofoam to look to be an insert that goes down in there, and then I will paint that styrofoam. So acrylic paint can paint styrofoam without any kind of issues. And so I'm going to cut a piece of styrofoam now and make a little insert to go in there, and then I can paint it. You can't spray paint styrofoam, but I do have an epoxy that is made to coat styrofoam, so that once you carve styrofoam, you can paint it in that epoxy, and that makes it sandable and paintable and then really durable, so that whenever it can actually withstand impacts without breaking like normal styrofoam. So it actually makes the styrofoam rock hard. But we're not going to use that. It should be just fine with a layer of paint on it, and we want it to be nice and light inside this mask. Alright, so our styrofoam cutter is beginning to heat up. We want kind of like a thin crescent moon shape. So that's what I'm going to try to achieve here. Alright, so this should be about right. But it's a little too tall. And I'm going to taper it. So on one side it's going to be thicker than the other side. That way it slides down and will wedge down in there. I'm thinking it's going to have to be much thinner. Yeah. So let's cut off our ends. I'll make it taper this way as well. That way it'll eventually wedge in where it needs to as it goes in. Let's do a little test. I think it's still too wide. It's a little too wide. Still a little too thick, so we'll have to make some adjustments. Not an issue. Not an issue. There we go. So let's try that. All right, I think that'll work. So I'll just put a layer of really dark colored paint on that. Mix some up here. All right, let's see what this looks like. And if I don't like it, I can always put more layers on it. So that's one of the great things about paint. Everybody thinks, well, oh, painting's so difficult. It's, you know, if you mess up, then all this stuff. But, you know, you really can't mess up. You really can't mess up. Messing up is an illusion whenever you're painting, because you just wait for it to dry a few minutes and then you paint over it. It's actually, you actually have more control over it than you do with drawing. There we go. So that's working pretty good. I might be able to jam one more piece of styrofoam down in here. Trying not to get too carried away. Actually, that was pretty good. But we need to trim it, so at the risk of catching this thing on fire. Alright, we're starting to smoke, so it's ready. Here we go. There we go. If we glob a little paint on that, should work wonders.